I'm very glad that you're here today because it's a special day. We have Curtis and Diane Steward visiting with us all the way from Chile, missionaries with Gospel Mission of South America, and we've had a great relationship with them for many years. We haven't been able to see them since 2017, but we're excited that they're back, and they're going to share with us throughout the day today. So stay for the morning service and the evening service tonight and hear all about what God is doing through them and their wonderful family. They have 3 girls, you might remember, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a little bit about each of them as the day unfolds as well. So please welcome Curtis Steward back to Calvary Baptist Church.
Thank you so much. It's always good to be back. It's good to meet with people that we know, and it's always good to come back to a church where you actually recognize some people that you've seen before. We've been in churches where we hardly recognize anybody. You know, it's actually kind of nice to be here with you all. As Pastor said, I'm Curtis. My wife Diane, our 3 daughters. I'll give you just a little quick rundown about them, and then later on we'll give you more details of other things. But our oldest daughter, Tiffany, lives with her husband in Ruby Valley, Nevada. It's about an hour's drive from the nearest town of any kind of civilization. Unless the pass is snowed in, then they got a 2-hour drive around the mountain to get there. So they're kind of isolated out where they are. They have 5 children. The oldest is 15, the youngest is 9. And we are planning, Lord willing, to see them sometime in September. So it's always good to go and visit them. Our middle daughter, Christina, is living in Chile in the town of Temuco City, actually. And she's been there doing ministry, teaching English to people who need to know English. She's actually teaching in our seminary, the English course there for the students to be able to know English well enough to read resources that are not translated into Spanish, and also for those that want to be missionaries in other parts of the world. They need a common language among all the missionaries and the mission agencies, so English seems to be it. So that's what she's helping them to learn, and we're thankful for the Lord to lead her in that way. And our youngest daughter, Emily, lives in Greenville, South Carolina, and she works in a bank. She's been answering the phone line in Spanish, and so that's been her thing. She's just been moved up to supervisor, so she's happy about that. She's also participating in her church that is merging with another one, and they're going to be located in an area where there's a lot of Latin people, and so she's becoming part of their Spanish ministry. She does that simultaneous translation thing. You know, she's got these headphones on, the pastor's speaking, and she's speaking into a microphone, and I don't know how she does it, but she does it. God's gifted her that way, and that's where he's using her, and we're thankful to the Lord for the way he's using each one of our kids in the places that he's placed them. This morning, I would like to share a few things of things that have been going on in my life, actually, and things I have read in the Bible that have sort of helped me mold all this together and become a little more aware of what God is actually doing in my life. And I've run into people that I've heard of before, but didn't get to know very well. Well, I've been getting to know a guy in the Old Testament. His name is Habakkuk. I think that's how you pronounce it. Don't quote me on that. I'm no expert on it, but that's the way I pronounce it. So if you do it differently, please forgive me. But I've run into this guy, and, you know, he seemed to have run into a lot of different situations and things in his life. You know, like where you're going to be in a situation where you realize there's some impending judgment coming down. I remember this as a kid because I got in with the wrong boys, and, you know, we're playing around, and I didn't know things were going wrong until all of a sudden out comes a teacher or some other authority figure, and all of a sudden we're all in trouble. And I'm thinking, well, you know, but I didn't do anything. You know, I mean, I'm singing innocence here. You know, it is not good that, you know, I'm going to be punished for something they did. Well, how would you like to be in a situation like Habakkuk, and you know judgment's coming, and you know judgment's coming because of the people, but you're stuck there and you can't get out of it? Makes you feel like complaining a little bit, maybe. God, don't you think this is maybe just a little bit unfair? I mean, I'm your prophet. I mean, I'm trying to warn these people. I'm trying to tell these people. I'm trying to live a really good life, and yet I'm going to go through all that with them too? Because Habakkuk was, his prophecy came just before the Babylonian conquest. When they went into captivity and Babylon came, they took them all captive, and so he would have been a contemporary of Jeremiah in the first part of Jeremiah's ministry, because Jeremiah's prophecy goes right into if you include Lamentations, it goes right into the captivity. And Habakkuk, well, he didn't, when he wrote at least, he didn't get there, but I think he did get there because God says, I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land. And I'm going to do that, and you're going to watch it. So he already knew this was coming. I mean, it wasn't something that, maybe whatever. No, this is what's going to happen. God says this is what's going to happen, and it's going to happen in your time, and I'm going to do that. But we start out with Habakkuk in his book, prophesying just before all this doom comes, and obviously not looking forward to the problems and things that were going to come in his time. And he did not look forward to these adverse circumstances, which, by the way, do any of you look forward to adverse circumstances? No? Oh, wow, and I'm not alone. We just don't like that stuff. We would prefer that God would deliver us from all of that, and we would have a nice, easy road to walk on. That would be the most fun. But God doesn't always give us what we think is fun. He gives us what we need for our good. And sometimes we don't quite see it that way. But God does it for our profit, as he did for Habakkuk's prophet. And as we're going to see, that is where he got to eventually. But it starts out by saying in verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk saw. The burden is something that is a tribute or utterance chiefly of doom. Okay, so he has this burden. He's seeing these things, and it's not a pretty picture. It's not going to come out well. It's like I'm doing something stupid, and I really hope I get away with it, but I don't think I will, kind of a thing. Like he knows this is going to be bad stuff. So he's there. He's in the middle of all of this. It's a burden that he saw. But he starts out by saying some things. And, he's asking, he's saying, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear?" Like, God, there is something definitely wrong here. I mean, I'm prophesying, I'm saying what you want to say, want me to say, and you're not doing anything. I would think you would back up your word that you told me to tell these people, and I would think that you would just sort of help out a little bit here. Just make it look a little better for me. I mean, they're not even listening, and you don't care. I mean, that is what he's saying. I cry, and thou wilt not hear. Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. I mean, I'm having a rough time here, and you're not doing anything about it. What's going on? And I think a lot of us get ourselves into that kind of a situation. We're kind of a little bit upset about things that are going on, and we're really trying to do it right. I mean, it's not as though we're out there doing all the evil stuff we can think of. No, we're trying to do it right. And somehow, God doesn't seem to even hear. You ever been in that situation where you've really had a big problem, and you're praying and you're praying and you're praying, and it's like your prayers are just bouncing off the ceiling, like nothing's going on? What do you do? How do you deal with that kind of a situation? I mean, Habakkuk lived through it. And he's saying, here, God, you're just not doing anything. And why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? You're showing me all these things. I mean, I'm seeing them. I'm looking at them. You're helping me to see them, but you're not doing anything about it. Aren't you the one to do something about it? And I think a lot of times we get into that situation where we think that God should be doing something, and he's not. We get a little bit upset about that. You see, God doesn't run on our timetable nor on our schedule. He has another whole plan, and it's a whole lot better than anything we could dream up. We're just not aware of it. For spoiling, for violence are before me, and there are that are raised up strife and contention. Like, this place is bad. These people are bad. And I'm praying and asking you to do something, and you're not doing it. Like, I'm just getting a little bit frustrated here. Therefore the law is slack, judgment doth never go forth, for the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. And that sound like what we're living through now? I mean, I read about things coming out of our courts, and I'm saying, like, they call that justice? And they don't have any idea what justice is all about. I mean, one of the first times, this is back in the early 80s, there was somebody there in Nova Scotia that was to do with the government, that had to do with the finances, and he embezzled $22,000, and they caught him. They fined him $6,000 and left him in his job. And some reporter reading all this stuff out says, and I think justice was served. Forgive me, but I don't think so. I do not agree with that assessment. Well, see, Habakkuk was reliving the same thing. He says, the law is slacked. I mean, they're changing the laws. They're starting to favor all the criminals now. Judgment doesn't go forth. They're just sort of putting things off. Wrong judgment proceeds. That's what's really going on here. That's the world we're living in. It's the world we're living in. And you know, there is an impending doom coming as well. We don't know when, but it's coming. And God says to Habakkuk, verse 5, I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you. Because I am going to raise up the Chaldeans. They're going to come from Babylon, and they're going to conquer. And what does he say about them? They're a bitter and hasty nation. They're evil. They're really going to do some bad stuff here. I mean, then God was going to judge them later on. But Habakkuk is looking at all of this, and he's saying, you know, God, I don't think I quite agree with you in all of this. And God says, well, I'm going to work something. I'm going to do it. And so he's saying, well, okay. He's starting to get the idea that God will deal with corruption on his schedule and timetable, not on ours. But he's going to deal with it. And then you come into chapter 2 where Habakkuk is saying, I will stand upon my watch, I set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say to me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Okay, so he's starting to get the idea here that he doesn't understand it all and God's got to correct him. So God is going to correct him. Well, God comes on the scene and he answers and says, write the vision, make it plain upon the tablets that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. At the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So God says the thing is already set in motion. It's going. And then he says in verse 4, he starts a whole new part of the book here in chapter 2, and he starts talking about self-righteousness. And he starts it out with this statement, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright within him, but the just shall live by his faith. So he's making a contrast here of those people that are proud, that think that they're good, but they're not. You ever met any of those Pharisees? I mean, they were the religious leaders, right? And they were really holy, righteous people, right? No. They were plotting to kill people. I mean, Lazarus, all of a sudden, he's starting to make Jesus look pretty popular, so we better knock him off. We got to get rid of Jesus. We got to, they're doing all kinds of things. They're bribing people. They're telling them to lie. Why are they doing all that? Is that in Moses' law? No, it is not. But how can they justify that? They can't. But they're doing it. Just because you are religious, just because you come to church, does not mean you're walking by faith. We can get awful self-righteous and judgmental. We can do all kinds of things that we think are okay because it's us. Well, after all, I mean, I don't have bad intentions here. So while this maybe is not the best way to do it, I think it's the only way to do it because it's going to get the results that I want. But do we wait on God and get his results? Well, see, God's not working on my timetable, but I am. And so we can pronounce ourselves holy and righteous, but we're really not. And he goes through the chapter talking about serving and doing things for earthly goods. The focus is earthly goods, not God's glory, earthly goods. I need. We live in a generation like that. I mean, we all know it's not wrong to have things. We all have things. We all need things to live. I mean, here in Canada, if you don't have a house, excuse me, you're not going to live through the winter. You got to have a place where you can shelter yourself from all the cold and snow and all the rest of that. You need a vehicle to drive back and forth to work. And I mean, we all function with those things. But where are those things in my scheme of priorities? That's what he's talking about. Is that my number one priority? That's the only thing I really live for? I mean, I've talked to people like that. Well, this is working out and that's working out. And I think by this time here, my house should be worth so much, and I mean, I bought it for $300,000, but if I wait to such and such a time, I should be getting $800,000 or $900,000 out of it. And then I can go off into, what are they living for? It's all the material things so they can have a good retirement. And then what? Well, I don't think they've thought that far ahead. I mean, most people, they're working hard and setting things up so they can have a good retirement. But what comes after retirement? Well, see, that's what God is saying. We don't live for material goods. We don't abuse others for our own personal gain. I mean, there's how many of these Ponzi schemes and all kinds of other stuff that have been going on in the world, and people have made millions and billions and lived the high life and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And, oh, yeah, it was just a great thing. But how many people suffered because of it? Well, they don't think of that. I'm winning, so that's good. Then he goes on to talk about the immorality and the idolatry and all that kind of stuff that goes on. And it kind of bothers me an awful lot when I keep reading about all the immorality that goes on in supposed good evangelical fundamental churches. Why does that happen? I mean, doesn't God give us pretty clear guidelines of how we're supposed to live our lives? And yet all of that is going on. Idolatry obviously is a part, because if we're living for earthly goods, that's become one of our gods. But then Habakkuk comes to chapter 3, and it's not just the burden of corrupt living or the burden of self-righteousness, but here I'm finding a certain burden he has with uncertainty. And he starts out praying. He says in verse 2, O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make known in wrath, remember mercy. Okay, he's saying God's word here is solid. I'm believing it. I'm believing God's work. And then he goes into a list of things that God has done for the nation of Israel, starting at Mount Sinai and working on through. And he's coming through all of these things and how the Lord worked this and how the Lord worked all the different deeds that he did and how he fought against the enemies and how he delivered Israel, and just seeing that judgment is now coming because the people have left off. They forgot all about Deuteronomy chapter 28, where God says, I set before you life and death. You can choose life by living this way. You choose death by living this way. And the people chose to live this way. And now death is coming. Judgment is coming. Problems are coming. And he's praying through all of this, and he's trembling. He says in verse 16, when I heard, my belly trembled. My lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself. Why? Because he knows God is going to send judgment. He is going to see it. He is going to be in the midst of this judgment that's coming down. And he's sort of uncertain. He's a little bit, like it says here, he quivers. He trembles within himself. And then he says that I might rest in the day of trouble. I'm just a little uncertain of whether God's really going to deliver me from captivity, whether God is going to just deliver me and I'm going to be alone working well. Things are going to be good for me. You know, like they're all going into captivity, but I'm going to keep living on my little farm. They're going to be punished, but I'm going to be living well. Is that going to happen? I'm just a little uncertain here. He will invade them with his troops when he comes to judge his people, but what about me? And that's where we come to the point of what did Habakkuk do in the face of adversity? What was his attitude when he looked at all this adversity, when he looked at all the problems, the burden of all the sin and everything else that was going on in the nation, the burden of all the self-righteousness of people who claimed to be God's children that were living for God, but they really weren't. And then he's even recognizing his own uncertainty, whether he really believes God. And then he comes here in verse 17 and he says, although the fig tree shall not blossom. I don't believe he's coming to a point where he's denying what Genesis 8:22 says, where God makes a promise, springtime and harvest will always be, nighttime and daytime. Like the earth is going to go on. I'm going to provide for the people. Harvest is going to be there every year, not for everybody. Some parts are not going to have it, other parts will, but there's always going to be that pattern of it's always going to be there. I think what he's talking about is his own personal situation. Although my fig tree doesn't blossom. Come springtime, out come the leaves, but there's no blossoms. There's no blossoms, there's no fruit. My fig tree is going to be barren. So even though my fig tree does not blossom, neither shall be fruit in the vines. I go out to look at my vines and, there's no grapes. I don't get any figs and now I don't get any grapes. The labor of the olive shall fail. My olive trees didn't produce olives, so I can't squeeze any of them to get any olive oil. Not looking good. And the fields shall yield no meat. I planted the wheat out there. A few little stalks came up, got withered in the summer, and died. I planted 3 sacks of wheat and got nothing. Not a very good picture, right? But I think it even goes beyond that. It's not just, even though that might happen to me, but it's even though other people are prospering, but I'm not. Even though other people have sinned and I am somehow suffering the consequences of their sin. All this stuff is not working out well. This is not a pretty picture. I'm not liking all of this, but even though all this happens, and the flock shall be cut off from the fold, like all my sheep just died. Winter snow came, they got so heavy they couldn't stand up, they all fell over and starved to death. Like everything that I own, every means that I have of making money, of surviving in this world, even though the whole thing disappears, even though other people out there have it, but I don't, what is my attitude? Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. And the interesting thing is, I was reading that and looking in some of my dictionaries that I have. The word here is, as for me. You remember Joshua said that. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Well, we have Habakkuk here saying, as for me, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the way I'm looking at it, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Why is he saying that? He's just said, Even though the worst disaster that can possibly be thought of is happening to me, and even though it is not happening to a lot of other people that I think are more deserving of it than I am, God is the most important person in my life. If I have God, I don't need anything else. Because even if I starve to death in this life and I die and my bones are rotting there on the ground, where am I going? I'm going to go be with God. I don't know about you, but the longer I live, the more I long for heaven. Because when I get to heaven, I'm not going to have an ankle that bothers me, and I'm not going to have a knee replacement, and I'm not going to have a whole lot of other things inside my body that I didn't know existed that just all of a sudden quit working, and you say, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah, well, now I'm figuring out, something's going wrong here. Well, what are those things? Well, they're very important little things. They're little wee tiny things, and when they start messing up, well, it messes up a whole lot of stuff. Well, I'm not going to have those problems. Heaven really sounds good. It's getting better all the time. I think that's why God allows us to get old and have these bodies that start decaying and falling apart while we're still living in them. Because we might think earth is such a wonderful place we wouldn't want to go to heaven. Well, no, we're not there. We're not doing that. Heaven is a wonderful place. We're going to be with God forever. There's going to be no more sin, no more evil, no more crying, no more sickness, no more of all these things that we have to put up with in this life. And I think Habakkuk came to the point where he said, you know what? Even though the whole thing goes, even though there is absolutely nothing left, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Why am I doing this? Because one thing I have learned in all of these trials, the Lord God is my strength. I think the Apostle Paul put it a little differently in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 when he besought the Lord 3 times that he would take that thorn in the flesh away from him. And God said, let my grace be sufficient for you. In other words, understand that my grace is sufficient. You don't need that thing taken away. That's where he came to. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. I can go anywhere, I can do anything, because God is with me. And as long as God is with me, I don't need anything else, because he will give me what I need when I need it. Because if he quits giving it to me here in this life, then he'll take me to heaven where I'll have it anyway. Because the most important thing in my life is God. I can remember a time when I was going through a bit of a problem, struggling. I don't know if you argue with God. I try to. I always lose, but I still try to anyway. And so I'm sort of arguing here with God, thinking, like this is not I don't think this is what I signed up for, God. I'm just not in agreement here. I don't think this should be happening to me. And I used to say, God, I don't need this. And it's just like I could hear him smiling and saying, oh, yes, but you do. That's why I sent it. So I know I need it. So I don't say I don't need this. But I'm saying, I really wish I could learn the lesson a little quicker so we could get out of this. But you know something? When you read the Bible, you read, Jesus and his disciples, and they're, usually on the sea or something like that. And sometimes he comes, and when Jesus comes, the sea calms, everything. Then all of a sudden, there they are at the shore. It's like they're going through this trial. Jesus comes into the picture, and boom, the whole trial's over. And other times, it doesn't happen. He's there with them, but the trial keeps on going. The storm keeps on roaring. It's just the way it is. So sometimes the adverse circumstances that we're running into just don't disappear because we've learned a lesson. And I can remember one particular time, it's interesting, we were actually studying the book of 1 Peter. And there's that little part in there about suffering, about going through problems. Well, it was my turn to preach, and that was my passage. And I'm struggling, and I'm saying, God, this really needs to change, and I don't think I can do this. And I'm just sort of back and forth with all of this. And finally I came to that point, and I said, you know what, God? Even if all I get out of this trial is to be able to preach a better message, then I accept that from you. And you know that peace that just sort of floods in, just washes over you? Because I am now in agreement with God. I am living the life he planned for me, and I am accepting his will for my life, and I'm moving through it, and I'm in sweet communion with him. And the problem still existed. It kept on going for quite a while, actually. But it didn't bother me anymore. It wasn't that irritant that Satan wanted it to be. And you know, Habakkuk comes to that point where he says, as far as I'm concerned, as for me, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. God, you're the best there is. And even all this stuff is happening, whatever happens, doesn't really matter, because you and I are in communion one with the other. I heard a song. It came up on one of the tapes that we have, well, actually CD that we have in the car, and we've had this thing for like years. And I don't know how many times I've heard the song. But one day, of course, you're in that kind of a situation when you're a little more sensitive to some things. All of a sudden, the words just start popping out to you, and and then you start going back and saying, well, okay, what is the guy saying about in the whole song? I mean, this kind of hit me, but why did it hit me? Well, I looked up the song. I got the lyrics. It's a song called My Hope by Paul Balok. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. But it says, nothing will change if all the plans I make are wrong. Now, I can decide a whole lot of things. It doesn't really matter. God's sovereign will is going to keep moving ahead, and I can plan what I want, but it's not going to change anything. So, even if they're all wrong, your love stays the same. Your light will guide me through it all. I'm hanging on. I'm leaning into you. Nothing can reach the end of your faithfulness. Your grace is with me. Through every shadow, every test, I'm hanging on. I'm leaning into you. I don't know where you will take me, but I know you're always good. My hope is built on nothing else than your great love, your righteousness. And then come the three lines that hit me. I will not walk another way. Even though the whole thing's fallen apart, and God says, walk right through the middle of that mess, I'm not going to turn and go another way. I'm going to walk through here. Why? I trust your heart. I trust your name. I think Habakkuk got to the point where he said, yeah, God, I trust your heart. I trust your name. I'm not going to walk any other way. I'm with you, and that's good enough. It's not only things that happen to missionaries in their lives. It's things that happen in all our lives. We all go through trials. We all have problems. We all have difficulties. But can we come to the point where we're going to say, as for me, I'm not going to change course. I'm not going to walk a different road because I trust your heart. I trust your name. I don't know where you're going to take me, but I know you're good, and that's good enough for me. Our Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your word. We thank you for Habakkuk, the problems he went through, the lessons he learned, the things we can learn from him. We just ask, Lord, that you would help each one of us in our own daily lives and the struggles and the issues that we face each day, that we would look to you, that we would know it doesn't matter where you're taking us because you're good. You're looking for our best. So we don't want to go a different road because we trust your heart and we trust your name. Your name is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. We can come to you at any time for the safety we need, knowing that you will look after us. You will use us for your honor and your glory, and then you will take us to be with you forever. We thank you for the privilege of serving you, and we thank you for the prophet, and we thank you for his attitude in the face of adverse circumstances, and we thank you that we too can have that same attitude in the midst of the adversity that faces each one of us. And we thank you for the strength we find in you. In Jesus' name.